Welcome back to Raised by Giants live discussion. Welcome everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys and any moderators or channel members out there. Today we have returning guest, former DOD and U.S. Army military intelligence, Trey Hudson. But before I bring him on, a quick reminder that Writer Ranger channel memberships are available and are really the best way to help support the show monthly for less than a cup of coffee a month. And if you become a Writer Ranger channel member, you get access to bonus episodes, and a new episode is going to be dropping this Friday. So click the join button beside the name of the channel underneath this video, and or check the description to become a Writer Ranger channel member and help support the show monthly and get access to those bonus episodes. So with that down, we have with us here today former DOD and U.S. Army military intelligence, anti-terrorism, counterintelligence, and security specialist, recently retired, Trey Hudson. Welcome back to the show, my friend. It's good to see you.
Hey, Ryder. It's always a pleasure and an honor to get to sit down and discuss these amazing topics with you. I'm really excited. I'm glad you reached out to me. So I am, as we say down here in the Southland, rip roaring and raring to go.
Rip roaring and ready to go. Let's do it. So, we've talked about a lot of topics on the channel since you've been coming on for a couple of years now. And in the past, we talked about the Dyatlov Pass event in Russia in 1953, where 9 hikers were found dead in mysterious circumstances. 6 of them had died from supposedly hypothermia. 3 of them had been killed by physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage. 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found laying in running water in a creek, and 3 out of those 4 had soft tissue damage to the head and face. And 2 of the bodies had missing eyes and a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Then we also discussed the Corvinia incident in 1993, which was also in Russia, which was very fascinating because it was very similar to the Dyatlov Pass event, but there was a survivor. And she said one by one, each of their hiking crew collapsed to the ground and started convulsing, bleeding from their eyes, nose, and mouth. Now, I didn't know until recently that there was a case that is sort of like these 2 cases that happened in Russia, but the case was in the United States. That was very similar in nature, which is called the Yuba County 5 from 1978. And I believe you've done some research into the Yuba County 5. So can you give us a little bit of information on what happened in that case?
Yeah, and now, of course, I'm having to go in the Wayback Machine because it's been a while since I've actually looked at the Yuba 5 case. But fill me in if I start wandering astray, much like these young men. If I start getting off the trail, just lead me back. There are 5 young men, and I'm just going to lay the facts out there. Don't read into it. These young men had some mental disabilities. Some of them had some psychological issues. Several of them had a lower than average intelligence quotient, lower than average IQ, but they were functional. They could work, they could drive cars, they could interact with people. And they were very, very big fans of, I'm trying to remember the university. It's a local basketball team. And they had left one night, all of these friends, to go see this basketball game out of town. And they never showed back up at home. It should have been an out and back, pretty straight thing. People remember seeing them at the game, watching them really get energized, with the game as it was being played. They actually played on a league. It played in a league for developmentally challenged individuals there in their hometown. So they were really, they were sportsmen, they were athletes, and they were very good friends. And they never showed back up. And it became a very, very big mystery on what happened to these young men. And where it gets really weird is they ended up on a very remote mountain kind of like a Forest Service road, a very remote road, way off track. Completely, completely off track, miles and miles and miles back up in the wilderness. And their car was found, but they were gone. And they started searching Yuba County, and I'm trying to remember the adjacent county. They were really ill prepared for it. If you look at it from the perspective of incident management, it was a very poor coordination of what they call a unified command. So the search was disjointed. There was a lot of back and forth on who had jurisdiction, who should take the lead, et cetera, et cetera. And this was back in the 70s, so incident command wasn't really developed and matured like it is now. And because of that, they lost a lot of valuable time, and the winter came in, and which resulted in very heavy snowfall, just burying the entire, what they thought was a crime scene. And so when things finally started thawing, they started finding their bodies. 4 of them, one I believe they never found, if I'm correct.
Right.
And they found the bodies in such places as, a few miles from the car. Really, really interestingly, is they found one of the bodies in a Forest Service cabin, which was set up as an emergency shelter. And this cabin had I believe it was a propane heater or a heater of some sort that, was self-sufficient. It had food. It had blankets. You could actually winter in there. You could survive the winter with all of the supplies they had there. But yet they found the young man's body laying in the bunk, malnourished. He starved to death with cans of food and a can opener almost literally within arm's reach. And then they found a friend of his, they think had made it to the cabin with him, I believe about 200 or 300 yards away from the cabin, if I'm not mistaken. So it's one of those things that was just a total, a comedy, not that it's funny, but just this whole daisy chain of errors. And no one cause has ever been brought forward of why these young men were so far off course. There was a witness that saw their car and remembers seeing figures moving around inside of the vehicle. That was the mysterious VW, which I believe got stuck behind them not long after they went all the way up the mountain road and got stuck in the snowdrift. And like I said, one has never been found. One was actually, the body was discovered by his father, which was rather horrifying, that the father actually went out there after the snow melt and found his son's body, saw a jacket, and found the remains of his son there inside of the clothing. So it's one of those big mysteries. And it's really odd because it isn't really on the consciousness of people here in the continental U.S., like the Dyatlov Pass and some of these other things. But it's equally as mysterious because no defined, solid, logical reason for this disappearance of these five young men, not just one, not just two, but 5, has ever been put forward. And then you start looking at it through the optics of, like David Paulides, his name always comes up, some of the missing 401 stuff, the paradoxical undressing, the type of, environment that these disappearances happen, the type of weather patterns that happen, all of this, you start to see a pattern, but, a lot of people have never heard of the Yuba County 5.
Well, I think that this was a big mistake on the media's part, because the media printed in newspapers that 5 retarded boys went missing. Like, just saying that really brings down public interest when you use the retarded word in there. Yeah. And that makes it seem like, oh, well, we don't care about these boys. They should have just said 5 boys gone missing.
Right.
Right. And that would have probably changed everything. Yeah. Exactly. But instead they said 5 printed in bold letters on top of newspaper headings, 5 retarded boys gone missing. Like, that's ridiculous.
And it really was an insult, not only to the memory of these young men, but to their families too. These were not, individuals that were so mentally incapacitated that they could not function. They could function in society. They drove up there to this basketball game and were in the process of driving back. So, it really, that's an interesting point because, once back in the 70s, it was a different time. And when you use the term retarded, and I'm not saying that as an insult, but that was the term used back then, is it really made it sound like, oh, these people were of greatly diminished mental capacity. They wandered away, they got lost and died. And that is not the case at all. It was not a case of people not knowing where they were going, and certainly not a case of them not knowing how to get back home. And the effort wasn't put into it like it should have. People with mental issues, be they psychological issues, mental illness, and some other issues, were pushed to the fringes of society. They were almost treated like throwaway people. And it was a real shame. And that's a very good point. That's an excellent point, Ryder, that it did not get the media attention. And quite frankly, I don't think it got the law enforcement and search and rescue attention that it should have gotten if it had been somebody of, maybe of a different social, grouping than it was.
Yeah, and I think one of the dads of one of the missing boys told the police about the cabins back there and that they should go back there and search them, and then they didn't, which is another really interesting part to all this, because it seems like when these mysterious things happen, there's always some kind of weather anomaly, which we're going to get into that here in just a little bit, but there's always a strange weather anomaly that calls off the search in almost every one of these cases. It's so interesting. And but first, the boy that was found in the cabin, it's theorized that somebody else was there with him, because apparently he was wrapped in all these sheets and all these blankets in a way that made it that he couldn't have done it by himself, which I don't know really how much truth there is to that. I mean, I could wrap myself in a bunch of sheets pretty easily. And apparently his shoes was missing, and then the shoes of another person was there at the front of the door, if I'm remembering correctly.
I think that's right. And I think that one of the assumptions that was made is the way the body was wrapped, that it might have been wrapped post-mortem, that somebody wrapped him almost shroud-like, and then left him, in a state, there in the cabin.
Yeah, and then another thing is apparently the father of one of the boys went out there and was like looking for them, and said that he seen tracks, and that there was only supposedly 4 sets of tracks leading away from the car. So what happened to the 5th guy that was never found?
Yeah. Right. And that's the big mystery is, you have this, we can look at it, through the lens of missing people as we look at these mysterious cases today. And it almost fits, perfectly, with some of the mysterious cases, all over the world of missing people. Something else, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. We talked about, the lack of media coverage. There's some very good podcasts out there on the Yuba County 5. And when you're listening to the family as they're interviewed, I get the impression that they're from a social strata that people tend to write off, that they're of a lower social strata. And it was like, here's these, hillbillies, and, their retarded kids got lost, and, it's just, who cares? Which is absolutely the wrong thing to say and the wrong way to treat people. And, I think that, and I remember listening to it, and I'm like, I could see the sheriff's department blowing them off, and just kind of disregarding, like you said, hey, there's cabins up there. You need to go search these cabins. There were 4 sets of footprints. You need to look into this. And the experts, just saying, yeah, you don't know what you're doing. Just go home and wait for a phone call.
Yeah, it's like if you find their vehicle there, then would you not automatically assume that they're nearby? Like, it doesn't really make any sense to me. And that's another thing, is it seems like in a lot of these cases that the police, given certain circumstances, inadvertently botch the investigation. The reasons for that can be there could be many separate reasons for that. I mean, there could be all kinds of different things going on, but it seems like there's normally police botching the investigation. There's some sort of weather anomaly, but common sense would tell you that if you were, how many miles was that mountain outside of town? It was like 40 miles
Yeah.
or somewhere around in that
Yeah.
vicinity outside of town. And that's like literally the only place that you could be. So if you find the car out there, you would assume that they are out there.
Yeah. It's I took a course in man tracking, how to track people, based on the tracks and how they move through the woods and all that. And one of the basic things that you always start with is what's called the last known point, LKP. Where did you see this person last? And that's where you start. And then you start fanning out from there. And it was just a real, what we used to call in the military, a Charlie Foxtrot, which is a cluster F ... And it's like they didn't want to find them. It's very odd. It's like they just did not really have any interest, in finding these individuals. And which is odd because I have a very good friend who recently passed away that worked backcountry search and rescue in California at that time. And they had the resources available. They had backcountry experts, subject matter experts with backcountry trained dogs that could track. And, they never seemed to bring these really massive resources to bear on this particular case.
And the dogs could have sniffed that car and picked up the scent of each one of those boys and led them right to them. Probably could have led them directly to the cabin where, well, I mean, it seems like whenever they first got there and they first found the car, all the boys were alive at that time when they got there. That's what it kind of seems like. And definitely the boy that was at the cabin. I mean, we're calling them boys. They weren't actually boys. They were in their
men.
20s. They were men. But especially the boy, the man that was in the cabin was definitely alive during that time.
Yeah.
So,
and it was, so is it, what you have to wonder, and, I would love to do this, and I know the records don't exist. And quite frankly, I don't have the time to dig too deep down into it, but I would love to go back if the records exist, which is kind of questionable if they do. Is this an isolated incident? Is this a one-off? How many other missing individuals were never found or were found months later in that same area? Because you got to remember, this was back before the 24-hour news cycle. And a person going missing might have, 1 day, 2 days in the newspaper, maybe picked up on the local TV media, maybe not. And if they're not found, that's it. There's no web page dedicated to finding this person. There's no groups of internet sleuths, constantly reviewing the case. It's one and done. So, how many other cases, do you have in that area? And is there a pattern? Can you establish clusters, kind of like, we've done here in the 21st century of missing person cases? I would love, if anybody's ever done that kind of data, I would love, or research, I'd love to see the data on, that area of California.
So looking into this, because I have my own theory on what actually happened through, watching people talk about it and listening to the documentaries and everything on it. What's your best educated guess and opinion as to what happened to them? You're muted, I think, Trey.
Sorry about that. My PC wasn't cooperating. My best theory, and it's a guess. It's a guess. Is I think they went up there and their car got stuck. We know that. Where it starts getting very confusing is why did 5 healthy young men, athletes, why were they not able to push that car out of the snowbank? From what I remember is it was not severely stuck. It wasn't hanging over a ravine. It wasn't bottomed out. It just ran up into a snowbank, couldn't go any further, and then couldn't back out easy that 4 of them could have gotten and pushed it out and turned around and gone back down the mountain. So, there's a lot of questions. Does the diminished, mental capacity of these young men, did it not allow them to do logical, linear thinking, and problem solving? Did they panic? I think the answer to that probably would be yes. They probably panicked when they got stuck. I think at least 3 of them set out from the vehicle. Now, how the one individual got miles and miles and miles away into the cabin, possibly with a second one of the group, is beyond me. I don't know how that happened. And of course, the 5th one, if I recall, has never been found. So, Occam's razor is they got stuck. They didn't have the problem solving skills to get unstuck. They panicked. And if I remember, there was a theory that one of the boys had a friend in that area, and they think that they might have been driving up a road to go see that friend and got lost. And they might have thought they were very close to that individual's cabin and went out to find it instead of always staying with the vehicle, which is a much better option. Why, they didn't contact the vehicle that was behind him, when it drove up, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. And does their mental capacity really even come to play, or is it something more sinister? Was it, I don't remember very detailed autopsies being done on the remains. I don't remember if anybody really looked at foul play. And then, we can take that bold step, and I'm not saying this is the reason, but, I've been, doing this stuff long enough to know that we've got to consider the X factor. Did something truly remarkable and unexplainable happen to these young men that, quite frankly, we may never know? Did something like the Dyatlov Pass, happen to them? Were their bodies scanned for, radiation? What kind of injuries happened to the bodies? Now, the remains, if I recall, were scattered by, animal scavenging and predation. But, I just don't think that a lot of effort was really put into finding out what happened. And unfortunately, that opportunity is long gone.
Well, it's interesting because, the theory of the conspiracy stuff really starts with the gentleman being wrapped in all the sheets and blankets at the cabin and having access to food, having access to heaters, and then not using it. Now, the family explains that he didn't eat the food, he didn't turn on the heater because he felt that would have been stealing from other people, and that wasn't what he did. He wasn't going to eat food that wasn't his. He wasn't going to use appliances and things that, wasn't his. I think the really big question here is, was the guy that was never found, I think his name was Gary Dale Mathis, was he even there? Did he even make it up to the point? Did he even get up to the freaking mountain with them? Right. That's the whole thing. And that's the whole conundrum of this thing. Cause I really don't think that he did. I don't think he made it that far. There's a theory that he was, because they left the basketball game early. Apparently they got kicked out of the basketball game for being unruly or getting into an argument or getting into a fight with somebody else. So they left the basketball game early. And there's a theory that on the bridge on the way up to the mountain, they were confronted by another group of men or another group of boys. And that other group of men killed Mathis and threw him off of the bridge. And there was so much fear surrounding the boys that they just went up the mountain. They didn't want to come back down because they were afraid that they were going to get, also killed. So they went up there in fear. But I have an alternative theory, and this isn't anything bad about the families. This isn't me saying anything bad about the families or tarnishing anybody's memory. But it may be possible because the boys really didn't like this Mathis guy. They feared him. They thought that maybe he was super aggressive. He was actually in the military, and he was being treated he got it was either honorable or a dishonorable discharge for anger issues and like flying off the wall and stuff like that. And he was on like medication, and they kind of didn't really want him to be a part of the group.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it may be possible that something happened between this Mathis guy and the other 4 boys.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 4 boys might have had to act and do something against him.
Right.
And that's why he wasn't there. That's why he didn't make it up to the mountain. And they went up there in fear because what they had just done, they knew that it was kind of, over for them, and they didn't want to, come down and face the consequences. I don't know. That's just kind of my theory on it.
Yeah, that's a theory. Now you're tickling my gray cells, and I'm starting to remember more now. Yeah, Mathis had been discharged from the military, not because of diminished mental capacity, but rather for severe psychological issues. And he was medicated, and he was a very ill fit for that group. And he, kind of became the de facto leader just through force of will, because he was smarter than the other guys. He was able to solve problems. He was able to think, but he was horribly unstable, especially when he was not taking his medication. And the only reason these boys knew him was because they all played on the same basketball team, in the league I had mentioned earlier. And I always wondered, did Mathis have something to do with the boys, and he set off on his own, to get away from what he had just done? But then again, that doesn't really fit the pattern, though, because their bodies were so widely dispersed. If you're going to kill somebody, maybe 1 or 2 gets away, but everybody scatters. Maybe they were scared of him, and they all went and died later from exposure or starvation or whatever. So I don't think that there was a thorough investigation. I never heard where the police really interviewed the families using that particular, did everybody get along? Did you ever hear, did one of the individuals ever threaten somebody else? Did he ever threaten the group? Did anybody hear anything? I think it was just like, these men went up into the woods, they weren't the productive citizens, that, we'd like to see back in the 70s, that society, valued back then. And it's like, well, too bad, we'll move on to something else.
And I think there's something else that's really interesting. I'm just going off of all this from memory, but 99% sure that the school that they went to had like Monarch in the title of the school, if I'm not mistaken. Like, and then you think, oh, well, Monarch MK Ultra Mind Control.
I do not recall the name of the school, but that doesn't mean that's not the case. I just don't recall.
I could be mistaken. I could be wrong. I would have to refresh my memory on it. Yeah. But I think it had some kind of the title Monarch in it. Monarch's school for, I don't know. Let me try and look it up. But this is a very interesting case for people that aren't aware of it. And there's recently a episode of a documentary that came out on Netflix that has an episode that investigates this case as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Definitely. Yeah, I'm glad to see that it's starting to get a little more interest now. I was kind of pushed back in the annals of history, and nobody really thought about it until I think some of the strange disappearances, in America's forest lands started to be looked at, a little bit more in depth. And I think the Yuba County 5, has popped back up on the radar. Like I said before, I kind of got turned on to it. I picked it up somewhere in research and found a really good podcast, multi-episode podcast that was excellent. And I'll definitely check out that episode. And maybe now the internet sleuths, will be energized and can start pulling some of this old data if it still exists, and hopefully come up with a solution or at least a really solid workable theory.
There is a monarch school education opportunity and transformation, but I'm pretty sure that monarch was the title of the mentally. It was like Monarch School for Mentally Challenged Students in Yuba City or something, but I'm not finding it on the Wikipedia page for the Yuba County 5. It doesn't really talk a lot about their upbringing or a lot of what they were doing, but I found that interesting, and I'm pretty sure that that is the case, but I have to get back to people on that. But so there's a lot of things that I've noticed with a lot of these strange cases and these strange disappearances. One is the police pretty much botching the investigation. Two is another, there's always a weather event.
Mm-hmm.
Three, it seems like, especially when it comes to a lot of the children that has gone missing in national parks and forestry areas, have some sort of mental disability.
Mm-hmm.
It's really strange.
Yeah, and one can easily say, well, these folks got confused or they got lost, and they didn't think through the problem and just made it worse by running off in a direction perhaps away from rescuers, not staying put, being scared, not reaching out to rescuers when they hear them. But there's always these odd outliers, these very strange things that just don't fit. I'm thinking about the famous case, and I can't remember the young boy's name right now, in the Smoky Mountains, where he became lost, and then the Army came in, which the U.S. military just doesn't do missing persons cases. That's not in their charter. But the U.S. military, and especially some special forces units, came in to look for him. So you have to wonder, and I'm not going to get all conspiracy now, but you have to wonder if certain areas aren't known to be vortexes, and I mean vortex in a way that people just disappear. They're just gone. And when somebody goes missing in these particular areas, it takes a bit of interest, generates a bit of interest from all the various authorities, starting from local all the way up to federal. But in the Yuba County case, it just didn't seem to be the case at all. It's almost like you and I talked about before. There wasn't a lot of effort there. So I'm hoping that maybe now that this case is getting more and more interest, that maybe some really exciting new data or evidence will pop up, or maybe even some new theories, and hopefully an answer.
I can't find the school, but I found that the basketball team was named the Gateway Gators, which is another interesting term. You got the Gateway Project by Robert Monroe.
Right.
Yeah. So I went to Contact in the Desert, not to switch topics. We can always come back to this, but I went to Contact in the Desert this year, and I met a few of your team members from the Meadow, and listening to a lot of people's the presentations. It's interesting because it seems like the narrative of ufology is kind of shifting. It's turning into AI driven topics. It's turning into USOs. It's turning into crypto terrestrials. I mean, we just had that. I don't know if you read that article that came out by the Harvard scientist that says that more than likely it's, crypto terrestrial, that it's entities from an advanced civilization that's always been here. And I thought it was interesting, all of the different kind of AI talk and the different kind of AI speculations. A lot of people were speculating that maybe the extraterrestrial phenomenon is an AI, artificial intelligence. Have
Yeah.
you thought about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say, here we are in 2024, and let's jump forward 50 years. Okay, I think it's a reasonable assumption that AI might not be sentient, but it will be extremely advanced, in the next 50 years. I think that's, in 2075 or 2074. I think that's, that's a given, as our technology and science, increases exponentially. So here we are 50 years into the future, and we have the capability to send craft out or probes to various worlds for exploration. How would we design a probe? Well, we wouldn't want that probe to have to continuously receive instructions from Earth. We would want it to be able to solve problems on its own. Hence, it would most likely be AI powered. It would have an artificial intelligence, maybe even quasi or totally sentient, that could solve problems. So we would send that probe out. If we wanted to look at it from the aspect of a stellar anthropologist, okay, or exoanthropology, we would try to make the probes or certain parts of that probe look as similar as they could to the life form on the planet. Think about when zoologists will try to lead a flock of geese to another region. They'll create an ultralight that looks like a goose, or they will create other stuff to mimic the species in which they're studying. So if I had the capability of making robots or synthetics with an AI aspect to it that looked very similar to the species that I'm studying, I would send them out amongst the species, gathering data, interacting, learning how to communicate. And at the beginning, that communication would be very strange. Now, where have we heard instances of very odd looking humanoid beings that seem to take place in around UFO sightings that look odd, and their communication is very very awkward, very stunted. What do we call those? We call those men in black. And as the AI learns how to communicate, learns the unique nuances of the civilization that they're studying, it will be able to communicate better, and more importantly, in a more fluid and natural manner. That's how I would do it, if I was 50, 75 years in the future and had that technology. So is it reasonable to assume that either a extraterrestrial, i.e. existing in this three-dimensional universe, there exists a technology and a civilization that might be studying us? Or is it possible that there's an extra-dimensional civilization and intelligence that has brought their probes down into our dimension, into the third dimension, to likewise study us and perhaps communicate with us, and eventually get to a point of open and honest two-way communications? So, when you start looking at it from, that perspective, maybe from, the perspective of an anthropologist, or a sociologist, from the exo field, exosociology, exoanthropology, it makes sense, that's how you would approach this particular conundrum, would be with artificial life forms that, using our technology, our understanding of what life is, might be indistinguishable from actual living beings. But in fact, they're artificial, and they operate off of an extremely advanced quantum AI.
Yeah, then that brings in the question too. It's like, well, if there are humanoid types of cyborgs, and that's the direction that we're kind of being pushed into, is this androgynous human AI cyborg type of reality, and then you get into the question of morality and ethics.
Right.
What are these humanoid robots considered? Are they considered human? And then you get into, well, what does it mean to be a human? Because
Right.
this skin suit could technically be a cyborg, an organic cyborg, right? We
Yeah.
could already be organic cyborg. So just because the shell is different doesn't mean that the consciousness is different. If you could put a human consciousness inside of a completely created cyborg,
Hmm.
would you still not be considered human?
Well, that's a great question. I'm a big fan of science fiction literature. One of my favorite authors, of course, is Frank Herbert, who wrote the Dune series, and then his son continued the series. And in the pre-Dune books, there are a race of beings called Cymex, and basically it's humans that decided to have their brains encased in giant mechanical bodies. And in the series, they're very much considered human now, albeit with mechanical bodies, but they still had the same wants, desires, goodness and evilness of human beings. And you hit an interesting point: is what is human? And the ethics of robotics, goes all the way back to really when it started to become looked at in kind of a non cheesy way. Is Isaac Asimov wrote the Robot trilogy. On what do we do? Are these creatures worthy of rights, albeit not human rights, but do they have rights? How should we treat them? Where do they fit into our society? And do they have the inane God-given right to exist and have self-determination? So AI, I'm kind of on a seesaw. Some days I'm kind of excited about it because I think it will make certain aspects of day-to-day life a lot easier. Then other times, I kind of get into the gloom and doom, of apocalyptic sci-fi, like with Skynet. I get kind of worried about it because the human intellect reaches a point of critical saturation. A human being can only be so smart, not AI. AI can quickly surpass our intellect. And if that mechanical, soon to be quantum intellect operating off of quantum computers gets to the point of parity with human intellect and then surpasses it, then human beings become inferior. It's almost like when Western scientists go into a very primitive tribe, the way that they look at them as inferior, back in the 1800s and early 1900s. Will AI look at us as inferior? And so will AI take a custodial perspective, these poor creatures, these human beings, which can, on a really, really exceptional day can crank out somebody with an IQ of about 200. I need to take care of them. Or are they a threat? My God, look at what they've done to the planet. And they need to be either eradicated drastically or eliminated through attrition, through mass sterilization, manipulation of our food and water sources to where we can no longer produce, where we eventually die out. And then the AI becomes the new human. They become the earthlings. And human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, are no longer in the picture. So, I kind of, seesaw back and forth on that. I'd love to have something that could figure out when it's time to, clean my house and do it for me and, mow my yard so I don't have to mess with it. But, what's the trade-off? What's the cost?
And then you think, well, what would be the benefit in doing that? What would be the benefit for the robots and the cyborgs to take over the entire planet? Like it doesn't really make too much sense when you think of it like logically. Like what would be the motivation to do
Well,
that. And of course there's theories and people say, oh, well,
yeah.
they want to take over the world because that's just, they see humans as unfit custodians of the planet and they want to, you know, wipe us out. But then if you get back to the real original source of this, what is the real reason that we would want to create these human cyborgs in the first place? And I think possibly it was first created for intelligence purposes. And I 100%, you can disagree, you can combat me however you want to combat me, but I think that they have had some form of human cybernetic robots that look almost identical to humans for a very long time. And they've used those as spies and military assets and to collect information and collect data. I mean, that's what an AI robot would really do. And then now they're getting to the point where it's kind of an open source thing where it's going to be, you know, kind of everywhere. It was a dual purpose, one for the military, one for the public. And whenever you look at the public side of it, what would be the thing that would be important for these things, right? It would be for immortality. It's like what we were talking about with, you know, being able to transplant your
Mhm.
brain into another shell, another human,
Right.
and then you'd be able to live forever. And that's kind of been a common trope back through, you know, a lot of these ancient Sumerian cultures. They were apparently able to do this organically. They were able to just kind of transfer their consciousness into another human being shell, and then it gets into, well, if extraterrestrials really do exist, maybe they can't travel here. Maybe they can only consciously
Mhm.
travel here. So maybe we create these cyborgs or some sort of cloned artificial intelligence
Mm.
skin suit, and then they transfer their consciousness from another planet onto our planet, and that gives them the ability to walk around.
Exactly. And that's no different than starting off with a very crude scientific piece of equipment called a Waldo, which was used in very hazardous, like research with radiation, where you've probably seen them in movies where they have the poles that come down, they put their hands in, and then the poles come down behind the clean room and pick things up. That's called a Waldo. Uh, and that is a way of taking the human tactile sensation, transferring it through machinery into tactile movements on the other side of the leaded glass to move isotopes and things like that. Now we're getting into very, very advanced gaming. Okay, that's something that we're seeing a lot of. The next step is actual haptic suits that you put on, where it mimics the human experience of being in an artificial situation. So yes, human beings in this meat suit, we're fragile, and it's a logical assumption that other beings likewise are fragile, and they cannot take near light speed or relativistic speeds of travel through the universe. They can't take extreme changes in heat or cold. They might not be able to breathe our atmosphere. So projecting the consciousness, and I'm going to look at it from a human perspective, projecting the human consciousness through technology onto an alien world or an alien civilization or whatever makes sense. So you turn the page, look at the other side of the coin. Why would that not be logical for another race or group of sentient, intelligent beings with that technology? It makes perfect sense. The Mars rover really is nothing more than a way of projecting the human experience onto another planet, using the video, using the robotic arms. Now it's not powered by AI, but we're able to take our human intelligence, project it out to that piece of equipment by radio control, by communications with it, making it do our will while we remain safely here on Earth. So it's not far-fetched at all.
Yeah, I really don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility. I mean, they already kind of showed this in a episode of the newest season of Black Mirror, with Paul, the guy from Breaking Bad, not Bryan Cranston, but the other guy, Paul. I can't think of his name right now. His first name's Paul, but anyway, he was in an episode of the newest season of Black Mirror where him and one other person was basically on a one-way trip to another planet. Like they weren't coming back, but in order to also be here, they had a cybernetic human AI skin suit that looked exactly like him. And whenever they would sleep on the ship, they would come back here and their consciousness would be inside of the cyborg robot,
Right.
and they would be able to take care of their family and do everything. Wild.
Yeah. I mean, the movie, Avatar, where people were able to go into a suspended state and they control their avatars and, walk around on can't remember the name of the planet, but, and fight the evil capitalist and all of that. It's kind of the same thing. And I kind of wonder, are we close to that? And then what are the societal benefits of that? And I think about, as I get older, am I going to be physically incapacitated? And will I be lonely? Would a cybernetic companion help ease my, my psyche in the later years? And so I see the potential for a lot of good, in a lot of lonely, depressed people having the companionship that maybe they've longed for their whole lives, coming from an artificial intelligence, and an artificial being, a robot or synthetic or whatever. So, it's one of those double-edged swords. It contains the possibility for very, very great and wonderful things. And it also contains the possibility for great evil, much like, when, fission, was first discovered, at the University of Chicago, with the Chicago pile, and nuclear power was discovered. And it was discovered that it could be controlled. It could be used for, much good, like nuclear power, treating cancer, things like that. Or it could be used to destroy hundreds of thousands of people in a blinding flash. So, the future, as it always has, is right there before us. And which route we decide to take is anybody's guess.
Yeah, I think people are starting to get more and more worried about it. And like I was talking about recently, it's like, well, what happens when? Because right now the AI is kind of not so advanced. I mean, it's an advanced in its texting capacity, like if you're using like Chat GPT or whatever like that. But it's not. The public really doesn't have the ability yet to create solid videos and solid AI generated images. I mean, some people can because some people have access to the programs that do that, but the general public really doesn't yet.
No.
You have to kind of prompt it. Now, what happens whenever AI is essentially able to create a bunch of different social media profiles on its own, right?
Right.
What happens if it can then create artificial pictures, artificial videos, and just post them without any prompts, without any human interaction, without having to tell it, make me a photo of, a rabbit in a hat in space. What happens when it just automatically does it and is automatically able to post wherever, whenever, and however at all times?
And that gets to an interesting point. And let me backtrack a little bit. You talk about Chat GPT, and its limitations. Is we don't know what is on the other side of the air gap on the servers in DARPA from the AI perspective. We don't know what they have that's air gapped from the rest of the world on their systems. It's probably mind-blowing, I would imagine, because they're looking at AI as a defensive tool. that you can send out these swarm bots that can think independently, and we don't need pilots. We don't need tank drivers. We don't need gunners. So, that puts it in a different perspective. But, like you're talking about, is how do we learn our sets of morals as human beings? There's one theory that morals, that, a creator gives us a set of morals that we intrinsically know what's good and bad. That's one theory. The other theory is that it comes from our environment and how we grow up, and how the moral influences of those around us in the society in which we grow up in imprints on us a moral set of codes. So now you have AI, and I'm not going to get political here, but I'm thinking about the election that's coming up in November. There are people with very strong opinions on both sides. There are people that think candidate A is great, candidate B is evil. Then you switch it and you got people that think candidate B is great and candidate A is evil. Why do they think that? Why, where does that come from? Probably from their upbringing and the type of people they surround themselves in, the society in which they live. So you have an AI of incredible intelligence and almost infinite resources that takes the determination that candidate X is evil, and anything and everything that can be done to stop this candidate from getting elected needs to be done. And then, like you talked about, it starts generating the deep fakes. It starts setting up multiple social media accounts. It starts, learning how to do information warfare and psyops. And it actually manipulates us into doing whatever it wants based on its own moral compass, which may or may not align with the moral compass of human beings. I find that horrifying, as a human being with free will. And I don't think we're too far from that. I think it's, we're right on the cusp of that. And, now we have state actors, manipulating AI to generate, bot accounts, and try to manipulate elections and generate deep fakes and, all of this stuff. But what if the genie ever gets out of the bottle and the AI decides to start doing that on its own? Who controls, who's the master then? Once the genie's out of the bottle, is the wizard the master or is the genie?
Yes, and I think that we're headed in that direction rapidly, very quickly, and I think that's a lot of people's fear, and that's how it starts. I mean, we've we all know about bots and like bot farms, and it's always
Yeah.
continuously blamed on Russia and Russia bot farms and like all that. Well, that's just AI. Do you really think that like a group of people are taking the time to make thousands and thousands and thousands of social media accounts? No, they don't. They just put it into an AI system. The AI system creates all the accounts for them.
Yeah.
And they magically have the same outlook on, well, I'm sure
Right.
they create the chaos. They take half of them to create and to, exacerbate the right, and then the other half of them to create and exacerbate the left. Right? That's really what you want, is to create chaos and confusion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tactic from the Cold War. It was developed by, some of the CIA funded what they called stay behind armies, which were injected into the intelligence services of various NATO countries. Is back during the 70s and 80s, the Italian intelligence services created a nucleus of operatives that would do false flag attacks against the Italian government and blame it on the Red Brigade, the Brigade Russe. And they were doing what they called a strategy of tension. And the idea was if they created tension in a society by these false flag terrorist attacks, people were on edge, and they could manipulate that fear into making sure that the Italian population was always pro-West and not pro-communist, not pro-Soviet. And they did that by creating strife, tension, confusion, fear, anger, and resentment. Okay, so turn the page. We're not quite doing that now, with terrorist attacks, but are we being manipulated as a culture, to generate that same feeling of dread, fear, anxiety, resentment, hate, anger, to meet the ends of some other force that is trying to guide us in our way of thinking, to affect the outcome of, and the elections, that's little things. Is it trying to guide us to a much bigger, goal, as our culture and our society?
Do you think that a utopian society is possible? Do you
Yeah,
think that
it's called heaven. No, here on earth. No, I don't know. I think that you can have a group of people uh, that have a common goal, and if they can be left alone, I think that they can create maybe not a total utopia, but something very similar. There are people in small towns all over the world that live in relative obscurity, that only interact with the greater society when they need to have their basic needs met, when they need to go pay their water bill, or need to go to the grocery store and buy, corn on the cob, or, can of corned beef hash, or whatever. And it's very much a existential thing, is, as these communities, decide to find happiness within themselves. Don't let other people define what happiness is. Happiness is only if this candidate wins, or happiness is only if you have this worldview. It's all within, and since I've retired and I've been able to kind of disconnect from some of that stuff, part of my job involved, always monitoring, international news and watching these things. And now that I've kind of disconnected, I find myself a lot happier. So utopia is what you make of it. The utopia is in you. It doesn't come from the outside. And, in my simple life, probably the biggest thing today, besides being on your show, is I had a patty melt from Whataburger, and I took great joy in that, because that makes me happy. That's something that I find
it's the simple things.
It's the very simple things, and you don't realize the simple things contain such huge, nuggets of joy that are disproportionate to its size until they've been taken away. Until you've been somewhere where you don't have freedom of choice, where you're somewhere where you don't have the freedom of privacy, you don't have relative safety, you don't have the sense of self-determination. And when you get those things back, it's like you found a gold mine.
To me, it almost seems like that even if everything were to be solved, this isn't me being cynical. I'm just looking at it with, critical thinking and common sense. Even if everything were to be solved, let's say we solved starvation, we solved the endless war problem, we solved homelessness, everyone was taken care of. Someone's going to get bored. Someone's going to create chaos.
Yeah.
Someone's going to do something stupid. Someone's going to screw it up for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just humans being humans. And the golden age doesn't last forever. I mean, if you look back through history.
And you're always going to have miscreants. Human beings have evil, in them, and selfishness. And, it's always been a big question. What do we do with these people? My belief is they should be removed from society. If they cannot live in society and respect the rights, well-beings of others, then they need to be removed from society. I am not pro death penalty, but they need to be put somewhere where they can't damage society. And be that a prison, a colony, or whatever, that's a choice they make. And I think, like I said, I think we all know what's right and wrong, unless you're seriously mentally ill. And then those people are ill and should be treated medically. But, if you decide to take the dark path, then you should be removed from the people that are seeking the path of light. And, everybody, kind of would understand that. And I think, quick, decisive action, to this ends, I think would be beneficial. I think part of the problem we have right now is we don't know what to do with, miscreants. We're confused on perhaps what's the right course of action, and there's a lot of different opinions on that, incarceration, rehabilitation, et cetera, et cetera. And that utopia, doesn't exist without a little darkness, and that's something that everybody has to come to a consensus on how to deal with it.
What I've seen, and I can look back on, my life, our problems always seem to change based upon our environment. See, a lot of people think, well, if I just have all the money in the world, then my problems are going to go away. No, your problems aren't going to go away. It's just going to be a new set of problems, a
Right.
different set of problems. So even if we were to get this utopian society and this everything is perfect, everyone is cared for, everyone's treated the way that they should be, somebody is going to find something wrong with something. I've seen this happen, several times. People that had really big problems, they solve those problems, they solve those issues. Right? Let's just take this for an example, like a homeless person finally gets a home. He's like, okay, well, great. I got a roof over my head. Everything's great. Well, it's only great for a certain period of time because
Right.
you were used to not having a home. And eventually it's going to be, oh, well, I don't like my roommates. My roommates are really annoying me. Well, just a year ago, you were grateful to have a home. You get what I'm saying here? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there's the big problems turn into smaller problems, but you turn the smaller problems into greater problems because those are the only problems that you can focus on. Because
Yeah.
those are the only problems that you have.
And in my opinion, the antidote to that is communications and love. Is you talk to people that you value and respect and say, hey, I've got this feeling of resentment, and it's really, impacting, me living the happiest life I can be. What do you think? And sometimes, having either a mentor or a confidant is a huge advantage. And I always tell people, that are running through bumps in life, look at somebody whose life seems to be put together. Now, when you peel it back, you're going to find out they have problems. But if they've made a lifetime of good decisions, be it financially, interpersonally, vocationally, etc., and you come to a crossroad in your own life, and maybe you have a history of not making good decisions, go to that person and say, hey, I've got a chance to take a new job. I have a choice of going on route A or route B. What do you think? And usually people that have made a lifetime of positive decisions will point you in the right direction. Now, the trick is being able to swallow your own pride in your own ego and say, wow, that sounds like a really good idea. I will take your advice. And it's that communication being done with love and respect, I think solves a lot of problems. Most of the problems that we have, if you trace it down to the root cause, it's communication. We don't do a very good job of communicating. And we don't communicate from a good place. We communicate from a place of greed or resentment. And I'm just as guilty as everybody else, okay, from that aspect. I'm a prideful, greedy, self-centered human being, just like everybody else. But I try not to be. And I think if everybody just put a little tiny sliver of effort into it, I think maybe this utopia, is within our grasp. And it doesn't mean everybody will have flying cars and Rosie the maid from the Jetsons, but I think they'll be happy because, like I said, happiness comes from within, not from without.
Right. The best that we can do is continue to be honorable in our actions and speak with integrity and do things that lead by example. It's just difficult when it seems like most people feel that the top of the pyramid is uh, not that, and then you have the trickle down effect onto every aspect of
Right.
our everyday reality. So if the top of the pyramid isn't being forthcoming with information, if they're corrupt at the top, which many people believe
Right.
that they are, then that corruptness trickles down into every other sector of society. Like, for example, like the police, right? And of course, the police is low down on on the pyramid, right? But people inadvertently lie to the police because
Mhm.
the police trick them into confessing,
Right.
right? And they think, oh well, if I tell them the truth, then they're going to lock me up, and they do, right? They say, oh well, I'll help you if you just tell me the truth. I'll get you off.
Yeah.
If you just be honest with me, then
Right.
I'll help you out. But they don't. They
Right.
never do, and that increases this idea to constantly lie.
Right. And distrust.
Right.
Right. And it all comes from, like I said, communication is in that the technique you're called is an interview technique called the read technique. People can look it up. And, we've all been told, don't make a statement, exercise your right of silence. And it's manipulative communication. It's poor communications. It's evil communications to manipulate a person into an outcome. It's not pure and good communication. So, like I said, it all comes down to communications and the quality of that communication. But there's a very interesting article I read several years ago called the Saint Benedict solution, and it talks about the monk Saint Benedict, who basically cut himself off from society and said, "You know what? I'm just going to live here in I can't remember if he lived in a cave or whatever, and I'm just going to focus on being the best person I can." Now, albeit he was a Christian Catholic monk, so he was looking at being the best person through that perspective, through prayer, meditation, and trying to do good, to the people that he did encounter. But he just didn't worry about the stuff outside of him. And if you really think about it, how much does that stuff really impact you? I am lucky enough that I have, enough funds that come in to meet my basic needs, for that of my wife. So if candidate A or B gets elected, how does that really affect me? Really? How does it affect me down here at grassroots level? And for probably 80 to 85, maybe even 90% of it, it doesn't. Only if I let it. Only if I let the aggravation and the discontent get into my soul and start driving me to decisions that aren't necessarily my own. And that goes back to what I was talking about, information operations and psychological operation. It's manipulating the thought processes of a target or a target audience. And don't be that target. And the only way you can be that target is if you choose to. And if you choose not to, things look a whole lot better.
Absolutely. I agree 100%, Trey. And thank you for coming on. Really appreciate your time this evening. Always a wonderful conversation with you. And could you let people, are you writing a new book?
I am. I'm about 10 chapters into it. Basically, it's a continuation of our experiences out at the Meadow. So what I'm going to do is look at some other places of high strangeness that have some similar things going on to it. I'm going to talk about our expeditions and adventures, and then get into maybe some revelations that some things that maybe people aren't aware of and had considered. From the things that actually happen. As you met some of our team members at Contact in the Desert, that are helping us with that. So working on that. Got a new website up, TreyHudsonResearch.com. Link to my current book. So I'm just busy. I've got some other media projects in the works. Just had a phone call from a producer while we were discussing this. So a lot going on.
Are they finally going to put together your documentary with the footage from the Meadow?
Yes. We hope to start filming in November. So I am working with, if I would give you a name, which I'm not going to publicly, but you would recognize the name, and this production company does very good documentaries. So was actually talking to the executive producer while I was I think I was actually at the airport in Jordan last week. We were texting back and forth. So there's a lot of big things. So I hope that, some stuff comes out that will, will really, maybe at the most it will enlighten people, or at the very least will entertain them.
Well, I'm glad that finally got made. You've been trying to do that for a
Yeah.
while now, so I'm excited to see that, and
Yeah.
I'm excited to actually show some of the footage and some of the things that you've captured on the show after the documentary comes out.
Yeah.
Finally, we'll be able to do that. I've been wanting to do that for a long time now, but I understand why you're
Right.
keeping the footage close to your vest, because it is very convincing
Right.
evidence. It's probably some of the most convincing evidence that I've ever seen. So I'm look forward to that documentary being come out, and I look forward to your new book. Send me the link to your new website so that I can
Okay.
put it in
Yeah,
the
I will.
description of this video. I have the Amazon link down there to buy your book that you have out right now. So send me the link to the website, and I'll get that up.
Sure. Absolutely.
Cool. Everyone else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Appreciate everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And we will see you guys next time. Trey, stay with me, my friend.